Gemara says the Gemara on today's Daf Yomi is Yevamos. I am Gimel Amid Aleph. Lag Ba'omer. Today's Daf Yomi Lag Ba'omer is Yevamos. I am Gimel Amid Aleph 73a. We're learning about an RL. We know we've been studying this. This chapter is called HaRL, the uncircumcised one. We said the uncircumcised one cannot eat truma. So what's an RL, by the way? We should say it in passing. Rashi says an RL is somebody who's uncircumcised for whatever reason, even if he has a perfectly good reason, i.e., not a good reason, but he has an excuse that's valid. For example, his brothers are hemophiliacs and they died during the circumcision, then he does not get his circumcision, but he's still considered an uncircumcised one. Whereas Tosfos says, no, it's only a person who sinfully decides not to circumcise, intentionally and sinfully decides not to circumcise. Anyway, so the Gemara, by the name of Rav Sheshes, Aral Ma'u b'Maiser. Is an Aral allowed to eat the Maiser Sheni? We know that the first, second, and the fourth, fifth years, there's a secondary tithe where the produce has to be brought to Yerushalayim in order to eat it. So is the Aral allowed to eat from the Maiser Sheni? Do we say, Ki heichi diyolaf Pesach mi-Maiser le'inyan aninus, just like with respect to Pesach, we learn out from Pesach from Maiser Sheni with respect to Aninus. What does that mean? That just like we learn out from Maiser Sheni that you're not allowed to eat the Maiser Sheni when you're in a mourning period, so too we learn from there to the Paschal Lamb that you're not allowed to eat from the Paschal Lamb when you're in a mourning, when you're on One, when you're a mourner. So too, Yof Nami Maiser min Pesach in Aregos. So maybe we should learn out also the reverse. Learn out Maiser Sheni. Just like Pesach, you can't eat it when you're in RL. So to Maiser Sheni, you can't eat it when you're in RL. The Gemara says, no, Odilma, or maybe it's the opposite, or maybe Chamer Mikal Yolev Kal Michamer Lo Yolev. Maybe we can learn out the Pesach from the Maiser Sheni because Maiser Sheni is more lenient than Pesach. But to learn out Maiser Sheni from Pesach, that we can't do because Pesach is more stringent. So you can go from the light to the strict, but not from the strict to the light. So Amar Lahu. So when he brought this question, when they asked this question to Rav Sheshes, when the Talmidei Yeshiva asked this question to Rav Sheshes, so Rav Sheshes responded, Tini Suah, it's a Mishnah, Truma of Abikurin, Chayav and Alayan Misa. What does the Mishnah state? That the Truma and the Bikurin are liable for death, meaning to say that if you eat the Truma and the Bikurin when you are Tameh, you're liable, if you intentionally eat it, you're liable for death, V'chomesh. And you also, if you eat them in an accidental manner, and you're not a Kohen, Rashi says, Zar ha'ochan b'shogeg, the non-Kohen who eats them accidentally, then you're liable then you have to pay it back plus add 1/5. But this only applies to Truma and Bikurim, but not to Maiser Sheni, because a non-Kohen does eat the Maiser Sheni. You can eat it, you just have to bring it to Jerusalem. And also about the Truma and the Bikurim. Remember, the Bikurim is the first fruits. You bring it, you give it to the Kohen. The Truma is the gift to the Kohen. A non-Kohen is not allowed to eat it. Only the Kohen can eat it. Only the Kohen is allowed to eat it. And they're considered to be the money of the Kohen. So therefore, let's say, as Rashi says, the Kohen wants to take his truma and take it and betroth a woman or purchase something with it. You're allowed to do it as long as you find somebody who wants to barter with it. But the Maiser Sheni, you're not allowed to use it to betroth someone. So the Maiser, or to marry someone, or to purchase something, because the Maiser Sheni is only for eating, drinking, and rubbing on your body as like an anointing oil. And so we say that this is another distinction between the Truma Bikurim and the Maiser Sheni. So another distinction between Truma and Bikurim and Maiser Sheni is that like they are nullified in 1 in 100. We know meat and milk is nullified 1/60th. So Truma, if the Truma would fall into the pot, you need 100 times the amount to nullify it. V'tu'unin rechitzas yadayim. And they require, before you touch the Truma, the Bikurim, we say that the hands are considered to be secondary Tuma, and therefore you need to wash your hands. Otherwise, you would make it a third degree Tuma, and that we say that third degree does disqualify Truma and Bikurim, and so therefore you need to wash your hands before touching Truma and Bikurim. But Ma'aser Sheni and Chulin, you're not supposed to wash your hands. If you wash your hands before touching the Ma'aser Sheni and the Bikurim, it says in Gemara Chulin, Hareza Migasi Aruach, you're considered haughty or arrogant. And now the last thing that the Mishnah lists is Va'erev Shemesh, that also for Truma and Bikurim, that let's say you immerse in the mikvah because you're tamei, you still can't eat it or even touch it until the sun sets. That's actually the first Mishnah in the entire Masech, in the entire Shas. That's the Mishnah in the Bikurim. When can you recite the Shema? And that's Mishnah in Brachos. When can you recite the Shema? From when the Kohanim return home after the sun sets. So we say all of these things apply to Truma and Bikur and Masha Inkein b'Maiser, but they don't apply to Maiser Sheni. So says the Gemara, we see from here, it doesn't list Aral. It doesn't list that the uncircumcised one can, as part of this category, that applies to only Truma and not the Maiser Sheni. Then Isa, and if it would be the case that the Aral can partake of the Maiser Sheni, Nisnei Aral, it would have listed this Aral, Aser Behen. And Masha Inkein, it should have listed Aral is prohibited to eat from the Truma. Masha Inkein b'Maiser, but he's allowed to eat from the Maiser. So we prove from here that the Aral can also not eat from the Maiser, because also would have listed it as one of the distinctions between Truma and the Maiser. The Gemara says no. Tana v'shir. What does that mean? Tana v'shir. Tana v'shir means the Tana said something and left it out. It didn't list every difference between Truma and Maiser. It left over one. Which one? So the Gemara says, fine. If you want to say it left over one, you can't just say this is the one that left over. You have to show that the Tana left out other things. So the Gemara then, whenever the Gemara says Tana v'shir, it follows it up with the question, Umay shir dahai shir. What else did it leave out? The Gemara says shir de katani seifa. It left out what was listed in the concluding case of the Mishnah. Because what was listed in the concluding case of the Mishnah? It says Yesh b'Maiser b'Kurim masha'im came b'Truma. So the Gemara's answer, this first answer, is going to be in the first half of the Mishnah. It didn't list that. It didn't leave out anything other than an RL. But in the second half of the Mishnah, it left something else out. So it's a little bit of a weak answer because it's saying in the first half, it didn't leave anything out as it relates to the difference between Truma, Bikurim, and Maiser Sheni, but other than the Aral. But in the second half, it did leave something out. And the second half of the Mishnah discusses not the difference between Truma and Bikurim and Maiser Sheni, but the difference between Maiser and Bikurim versus Truma. So the Seif of the Mishnah says, Yesh b'Maiser Bikurim masha'en came b'Truma, that there is, with respect to Maiser and Bikurim, that which does not apply to Truma. What is that? Sha'Maiser v'Bikurim Ma'aser Mikurim Te'unin Havas Makom. Ma'aser Sheni and the first fruits, you need to eat them in Jerusalem. You need to eat them in Jerusalem. V'te'unin Vidoy. And also you need to confess. This is based upon the Torah says in Kisavo Ubi Arti HaKodesh Minabayis. I've confessed that I've gotten rid of all of the Kodesh from my house, and also by the Rashi says it says it also by Bikurim as rachis. So we see from here that both of them require this confession. The Ma'aser Sheni and the Bikurim Masha Inkim Truma. Or Truma, even though Truma has a little bit of a reference to it in the Torah with respect to Ma'aser Sheni, there's also a reference to Truma. Nevertheless, it's not the main point of it. And also, the Aser La'onein, and both of these things are prohibited to an Onein, meaning to say, Ma'aser Sheni and Bikurim are prohibited to an Onein, unlike Truma. Rabbi Shimon Mati, Rabbi Shimon allows the Bikurim to an Onein. The Gemara is going to explain the reasoning for it. And both of them are obligated at the end of the when you come to the third year, Bikurim and Ma'aser Sheni require the destruction. What does this mean? Rashi says that if you left your Ma'aser the first and the second years, then in the third year you have to take it to Jerusalem and you have to confess that I have gotten rid of it. And if you haven't gotten rid of it, wherever you are, you need to get rid of it. So this is Chayavim B'Biur. Rabbi Shimon Poter. Rabbi Shimon says that bikurim is not obligated in the concept of biur. But anyway, we see from here view aser levar mehem bituma. But whereas the prohibition, we see that this brisa could have left out a category. What category did it leave out? The prohibition levar mehem bituma, to consume them when they are in a state of ritual impurity. Let's see what Rashi says. The Tanakama, who had compared bikurim to meiser for all matters, he should have listed that it should have listed this category that you're allowed to light them in a state of ritual impurity and benefit from them. And so therefore it didn't say that you're not allowed to light them, whereas about truma you are allowed to light it. So it should have said that there's another difference between truma and bikurim and meiser. That bikurim and meiser you're not allowed to benefit from the fuel if the fuel is tamei, whereas the truma you can. So it didn't list that. Va'ochan b'tumas atzman lokan. Another category which they didn't list is that if the fruits themselves are tamei and the person is tahor, and you eat from them, you get lashes. Masha ain't came with truma, and this doesn't apply to truma. The truma you don't get lashes. We're going to see in the Gemara it's a positive obligation, a positive commandment not to eat it when it's tamei, but you don't get lashes if you do. And also the truma you're allowed to use the fuel that's tamei for your benefit. Unlike the bikurim and meiser. So we see from here then the second clause of the Mishnah. It left certain things out. Alma ton of a shear. So since it left things out in the second clause of the Mishnah, therefore we can say then the first clause it left out the RL. So therefore it's not a proof that the RL cannot eat cannot eat from the Meiser Sheni. So the Gemara is going to bring another answer to this question about ton of a shear, but before it does that, meaning what exactly the ton of the Mishnah left out. But before it does that, the Gemara is going to analyze the source for some of these laws that were listed in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara about Asurin La'onein. How do we know that the Bikurim and that the Bikurim are prohibited for an Onein? Rabbi Shimon Mati. Rabbi Shimon allows you to eat the Bikurim in your state of Aninus, whereas Truma, everybody says is allowed. So Rabbi Shimon allows the Bikurim, but the Meiser Sheni, according to the Tanakama, is prohibited. According to everybody, is prohibited in the state of Ininus. Minalahu. How do we know this idea that the Chachamim say that the Bikurim are prohibited in the state of Aninus, in the state of mourning? Because it says, so it says you're not allowed to eat in your gates the Meiser of your grain, your oil, your Truma. We learned in Masechas Makos that what does this mean? Trumas yadcha elu bikurim. So you're not allowed to eat in your gates the trumas yadcha. And what does that mean? And in that verse, we're comparing Meiser Sheni to trumas yadcha. And what is trumas yadcha? That's your bikurim. The iskish bikurim l'meiser. So we compare the Meiser Sheni to the bikurim, and we say this follows. We compare the Meiser Sheni to the bikurim. Ma Meiser Aser La'onen. Just like the Meiser Sheni is prohibited for an Onen, Af Bikurim Aser La'onen. So to the Bikurim you cannot eat while you're in a state of mourning. The Rabbi Shimon would say Truma Karinu Rachmana. No, the Torah calls the Bikurim Truma, uses this term, and so we shouldn't compare it to the Meiser Sheni, but we should compare it to the Bikurim, to the Truma. Ma truma mutaras onen, just like the truma is permitted for a mourner, af bikurim mutar onen. So too the bikurim is permitted for an onen. And says the Gemara, v'chayavim b'biur. And also, how do we know this idea? The Mishnah had said that you're obligated to destroy the crops during the third year if you have not used it for Meiser Sheni or bikurim. Whereas Rabbi Shimon poter, and Rabbi Shimon exempts you. Mar makish, mar lo makish. One of the authorities compares it to Meiser Sheni, and one doesn't. Now we have learned the next concept, that you're not allowed to get benefit from the Tamei Meiser Sheni and the Tamei Bikurim. If they're ritually impure, you can't use them for fuel, unlike Truma, which you can. And also, if you eat them when they themselves are ritually impure, the Meiser Sheni or the Bikurim, you get lashes. But unlike the Truma where you don't get lashes. So Minoan, what's our source for this idea? Minoan, what's our source for this idea? So the Gemara explains, what's our source for this idea? So Gemara explains that Tanya Shimon Omer will be artemi menu b'tamei. When it states with respect to the Ma'aser Sheni, it will be artemi menu b'tamei. It means bein shani tamei v'hu tahor, bein shani tahor v'hu tamei. It means to say that the person is confessing that not only when the Ma'aser Sheni was tahor did I not benefit from it for outside of Jerusalem or even in Jerusalem, because Ma'aser Sheni can only be used for eating. But also, even if I was not allowed to eat it because I was tamei, I also didn't benefit. And how do we know that you're not allowed to eat the Ma'aser Sheni when you're in a state of ritual impurity? Rabbi Shimon said, "Eini yodea." So he says, I don't know where it says that the Ma'aser Sheni you can't eat in a state of ritual impurity. The Gemara immediately challenges this. What are you talking about? Tumas aguf behedjik ksivei. It states that, what do you mean that if you are tamei, it says, what do you mean? Tumas aguf is explicitly written in the Torah. So the Gemara answers, doesn't it say nefesh asher tigabo v'tamad arav v'yochal menakachim ki rachat b'sara b'mayim? Doesn't it say explicitly that if you touch it when you are tamei, you can't eat it until you go to the mikvah? So we see that you're not allowed to eat the Ma'aser Sheni when you're in a state of ritual impurity. So the Gemara explains, no. This is what Rabbi Shimon was asking when he said, I don't know where it says this. He says, this is what he was asking. Tumas atzmo minayin. How do we know that if the Ma'aser Sheni itself is tamei, you're not allowed to eat from it? It says you're not allowed to eat in your gates the grain, the Ma'aser of your grain. And then later on it says, that in your gates you could eat them together. And the Tanakh Be'er Shmuel taught in the Bryce. He says, "Afiu tamei v'tar ochlin al shulchanecha b'kara achas." That even a tamei and a tar can eat together on one table from the disqualified meat that was consecrated. We don't have to be concerned that the tamei will touch the meat, and therefore the person will be eating tamei meat, because there's no prohibition to eat them in a state of ritual impurity. V'ka'amar rachmana b'sharecha, which means meaning to say that with respect to hektish, that's where we say the tamei and tahar cannot eat on one plate. But when it comes to Ma'aser Sheni, but then you cannot eat it, because when it comes to Ma'aser Sheni, we're going to say that those things become tamei, and therefore you're eating Ma'aser Sheni tamei. So we see from here that there's a prohibition to eat the Ma'aser Sheni that is tamei. So the Gemara then says, let's go through what we also said, that Masha Ein came to Truma, that there's no prohibition to benefit from Truma that was tamei, to use it, for example, to be the fuel for your fire. What's the source for this idea? Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Avo says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that the source is the Amar Kra will be artemi menu b'tamei. It says about the Ma'aser Sheni that I did not consume it when it was tamei. That the Ma'aser Sheni you can't use in a state of ritual impurity. But you can use the truma oil that was tamei. You can use that for your benefit. Gemara says but maybe it means that you're not allowed to use the Ma'aser Sheni oil that was tamei, but you can use the hektish oil that was tamei. Gemara says lav kal v'chomer. No, we're going to make a kal v'chomer. Ma'aser is the more lenient one, and about it the Torah says will be artemi menu b'tamei, that you can't use when it's a state of ritual impurity. Kodesh kachim, the sacred food, which is chamor, which is much more severe than Ma'aser Sheni or kol shekain. For sure, you can use it for fuel when it's tamei. Gemara says no. Truma nami kal v'chomer. Truma is also a kal v'chomer. Why? Haksiv mimenu. It says so. The Gemara says even though truma is more severe than Ma'aser Sheni, the word mimenu tells us that only the Ma'aser Sheni limited, but not the truma. Gemara says, well, why are you applying this mimenu to truma to say you can use the oil as fuel and not to the hektish? Gemara says, Mistabra koya shom me'atina. It's more logical to assume that the Torah is not telling us that we can use the hektish as fuel, shekain pankakas, because it has the following areas which are unique to the stringencies of the kachim. What are they? Pigol, no, pigol is that you need to slaughter the sacrifice with the right intent, that you can't have the intent to sprinkle the blood beyond the proper place or beyond the proper time. The karba, no sir, that if the meat is expired, it is prohibited. Korban, that it's brought as a sacrifice. Me'ilah, that if you misappropriate it, you intentionally is kares, and accidentally you have to bring a korban and you pay back extra kares. That the penalty for kachim, if you eat it while you're tamei, is that you get severe penalty of kares. Va'asar onim. And if you're a mourner, you can't eat the kachim. The Gemara says, Adarabah, truma is more severe. Truma lo matina. We should have said that the truma you can't use as fuel. Shekain machpaz. Truma is machpaz. What's that? Misa, if somebody eats the truma when they are tamei, then they are going to be considered like they are going to get death from heaven. V'chomesh. And also, if you eat the truma accidentally, you have to pay back to the Kohen and add 1/5. Ve'en la pigeon, and you can't redeem the truma. The truma has to be given directly to the Kohen. V'asura wazarim. And also, the truma is prohibited to all non-kohanim, unlike the kachim, which a certain kachim can be eaten by kohanim. So we still say hanach nafishin. No, there's more unique stringencies by kachim. But by the same, or alternatively, kares adifa. The more severe penalty of kares trumps the less severe penalty by eating truma in a state of ritual impurity, which is death from heaven. But ochan betumas atzman, and we had stated that they can be eaten. It says in the Brisa, that one who eats them, these meiser sheni and the bikurim, when they are tamei, gets lashes. If they are pure, but the food is tamei, they get lashes. Masha truma, where it's not the case with respect to truma, there's a positive commandment to eat it, but not a negative commandment. So the Gemara says, so you don't get lashes if you eat the truma when it's tamei, but you do get. It is prohibited. We know what's the source. So it says you can eat in your gates. So what does that mean? It says in your gates you can eat it. So to somebody, so this teaches us that to the psuim mukdashin you can eat when they become tamei, but not to the fruits of truma that became disqualified. Say isn't us say. And Rav Ashi now goes back to the original thing we said, that the whole thing is we were looking for the ton of a shear, that we had said that the aral, we had tried to say whether or not an aral is prohibited in Meiser Sheni, and we tried to say it was because it didn't list it in the Mishnah amongst the differences between Meiser Sheni, between Bikurim, Meiser Sheni, and Truma. So we see just like it's prohibited to Truma, it's also prohibited to the Meiser Sheni. But then we said, well, what else did he leave out? And he said, ton of a shear. Then no, the Tana just left it out. And so we spent the whole daf saying he left out all the stuff in the second category, which was not the differences between Truma versus Bikurim and Meiser Sheni, but the differences from Meiser, the differences between Meiser and Bikurim, which are not by Truma. Whereas the first cause, we're saying all those things that were. Hold on, let me just get the exact lashon that Truma and Bikurim have, which Meiser Sheni doesn't have. And the second part was listing all those things that Bikurim and Meiser Sheni have, which Truma doesn't have. So Rav Ashi says, no, even from the first cause, you can see what the Tana left out. Rav Ashi Mireisha Nami Shmas Mina the Tana Mashir. Even from the first cause, which says the differences, the first cause I listed, those differences between Truma and Bikurim versus Meiser Sheni, and left something out. What did it leave out other than the Aral? What else did it leave out? The Truma and Bikurim are applying all of the years of the sabbatical, all 6 years, whereas Meiser Sheni only applies first, second, and fourth and fifth. So it didn't list that. So from the fact that it didn't list that, it also didn't list that the Aral, that the Meiser Sheni, maybe it also didn't list that the Aral is not allowed to eat from the Meiser Sheni. And the other thing it didn't list was Ein Lam Pigeon, that that Truma and Bikurim are not able to be redeemed. You have to give it straight to the Kohen and straight to the Kohen. You can't redeem it, whereas the Meiser Sheni can be redeemed. So we don't see from here a proof that from the fact that the Mishnah doesn't list that this is a difference between Truma and Meiser, that the Kohen cannot eat that the RL cannot eat the Truma when he's in the RL, but it doesn't say that the Meiser Sheni can't. Say no, the Tana wasn't being exact. The Tana wasn't listing all the categories. All right, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to address them.